there needs to be some sex every 5 or 10 minutes or it can't function as a show. I really hate the Other Boleyn Girl. What about that sexy widow over in France? Let's call it girthy. He's looking a little girthy. I'm Dr. Joanne Paul. I'm the author of The House of Dudley and Thomas More, A Life and Death in Tudor England. And today we're going to be taking a deep look into depictions of Henry VIII on screen. And along the way, we'll be also looking at his 6 wives. Bear with me while we deal with Henry VIII. Okay, so we're starting with The Spanish Princess, Season 1.
This is not the palace.
This is the tower. We'll stay in tower apartments tonight. This is the custom before a royal wedding. They're most comfortable.
Here's our main titular character here, Catherine of Aragon, who appears to be walking the battlements for reasons unknown.
Hello. May I introduce Prince Henry, Duke of York?
Harry. People call me Harry.
Okay, so we appear to be in 1501. Catherine of Aragon has recently arrived to England. She had this grand entry into London, and she's there in order to marry the heir to the throne, Prince Arthur. They'd been betrothed for about 4 years. They had a proxy wedding 2 years before, and now this is the eve of their actual proper wedding, which is going to take place at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. She is bumped here into the Duke of York, Prince Henry, Harry as he identifies himself here, who is the future King Henry VIII, her future husband.
Do you like it here? It's cozy, isn't it?
I'm Charlie Brandon. Not yet married.
It's me who'll be leading you up the aisle tomorrow. Lucky you, eh?
Thank you for your welcome, Prince Harry.
He says here that he's going to escort her to her wedding the next day. There is some truth in that historically. He escorts her through London when she has her big triumphant celebratory arrival, and he does escort her out of her wedding as well at St. Paul's Cathedral. To a modern viewer, it would look like they had gotten married, which of course they end up doing. This, I guess, is meant to be their first meeting, bumping into each other on the battlements. They probably would have met in a more formal setting at court, perhaps even at these ceremonies and celebrations themselves. The major, I suppose, historical issue with this scene is that Harry here is meant to be, 16 or 17 years old, about the same age as Catherine. He was, in fact, 10 years old. And so it would have been a very different sort of encounter between the 16-year-old princess and the 10-year-old duke. Catherine is quite a catch for Henry VII to marry to his sons. She's the daughter of 2 Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, and many European princes wanted to marry her. Henry VII even considers marrying her himself after the death of Arthur and his wife Elizabeth. So she brings with her a lot of wealth, a great pedigree. She is really considered to be the future mother of great kings. And that's why she's brought over to England to marry Arthur. She's also very well educated and, as Henry himself says, very beautiful.
Whoa. Give that here. Let me see. A bolt?
Yes. Try her out.
Rory O'Connor does a fantastic job playing the young Henry VIII. He's proud, he's overconfident, he's very sure of himself, but in an almost pathetic kind of way. He does hit himself in the face with a crossbow there. Just a funny little side note, Rory, the Irish name, in fact means red-haired king. So he's a perfect casting for this. And the young Henry VIII was very attractive as he is portrayed here. The young Henry was probably a very sensitive child. We don't know that much about him beyond his education, which was very good, and that he was very proficient at it. But in terms of his personality, the only real glimpse we get of him is when his mother dies, Elizabeth of York, and the young Henry is absolutely distraught. There's a great picture from that moment, a great illustration of that moment. And he appears to be bent over her bed, sobbing as a young boy. This may have, in fact, impacted his view of women later on. No woman, no wife ever really lived up to his mother.
Go! Leave us!
I need garlic, onion, and sheep's stomach if they have it. My mother used it after battle.
Let me kiss you.
Your blood is up. Let me soothe you first.
A virgin should not entertain a man alone if she hopes her reputation as a maid will be believed.
Joanna, please.
We've had, I think, quite a time skip here. Catherine is in black. She's obviously being more than a little bit flirtatious with Henry, and there's this suggestion that she's trying to maintain the argument of her virginity. So I think at this point, Prince Arthur, her husband, has died, as indeed he did very shortly after their wedding, 5 months after their wedding. Catherine, for the rest of her life, swore up and down that they had never consummated that marriage, which meant that she was free to marry again, and obviously has picked her next husband in her former husband's brother. We have the entry of her sister, Juana of Spain, who did indeed visit England. Her husband, Philip, sort of washed up by accident on England's shores, was there for 3 months, and his wife, Juana, did join him there as well. And there was a reunion of sorts between Catherine and Juana. Keep in mind, Henry was actually about 14 or 15 during the events of all of this. So this is stretches the bounds of historical credence, let's just say. I think we're meant to see Henry here as a bit of a womanizer. And that makes sense with the reputation that he has. He did have a number of mistresses throughout his many, many marriages. Some of them he married. But the idea that he starts out that way, I'm not so convinced by. And in fact, when you look at him compared to, say, Francis I of France, he doesn't actually have that many mistresses, and he has very long relationships with each of them. So I beyond the fact that he was 14 or 15, and this is Juana of Spain, I'm not sure, even as a young man, he was that promiscuous. Here we have the death of Henry VII, Henry's father. So Henry is now Henry VIII king. Interestingly, Henry VII's death was kept secret for many days while they tried to secure the reign of his son. Henry was only 17 when his father died, so there was some question about whether he was ready to accede to the throne himself. As well, Henry VII had come to the throne in battle in the Wars of the Roses, and so there hadn't been a smooth, peaceful transition of power from adult male monarch to adult male monarch for something like 150 years. So there was a lot of reason to ensure that this transition did happen peacefully, and that it happened at all. And so they kept his corpse in his chambers for 2 days while they figured all of this out. And Henry was let in on the secret, but only after a number of the counselors knew about it.
I should hang the lot of you.
Spoken like a true king, Harry.
Enter Margaret Beaufort. She was the mother of Henry VII. She gave birth to him as a very, very young girl. I think she was 13. So he's actually not that much older than her son.
Her closest lady swears on the Holy Cross that her marriage to your brother was a full one, consummated daily over many, many months.
Leave us!
She is no maid. She is a liar.
I don't know what either of them are doing in what appears to be the King's Council meeting. I think Margaret Beaufort did sometimes show up to them. Catherine of Aragon wouldn't have done. What she's asserting here is that Catherine and Arthur did consummate their relationship. There are witnesses who suggest very strongly that they didn't engage in any physical contact on their wedding night, that actually when her ladies came in, they reportedly felt sorry for her and laughed at Arthur for his inability. A later chronicler suggests that Arthur actually emerges from the wedding bedchamber bragging that that night he had been, and I quote, in the midst of Spain, and calls for water because he's so dehydrated. That is a later report. Most of the witnesses who are drawn upon when this becomes a matter for dispute later on suggest that they didn't consummate their relationship, at least on their wedding night. They did spend 5 months living together, though, so it's unclear. But Catherine swore on everything wholly available that it had never happened.
Lady Grandmother, the Pope has confirmed that he sent a dispensation for my wedding. I must assume that his first communication on the subject was lost or destroyed.
We choose to have a private wedding in the Church of the Observant Friars in Greenwich.
You will not attend.
Harry, no.
The question of whether or not she had consummated her relationship to Arthur was less important at this point. They did have a papal dispensation saying it was fine that they get married. So even if she had fully consummated it, it might not have been so much of an issue. I think the question of whether she was a maid was important, but again, no one was making much of a fuss about it at the time, and certainly not Margaret Beaufort. She really liked Catherine. In her will, when she dies, as I say, not long after, she leaves her 3 golden cups, just as a sign of her love and esteem for her. So nothing like this ever happened.
But why would I have? I walked through fire for you. I stood against my father, risked my throne.
And now we have the Other Boleyn Girl. I really hate the Other Boleyn Girl.
I'll be recording this.
Yeah. I really hate the Other Boleyn Girl. I really do. Okay. Natalie Portman here playing Anne Boleyn. Mark Rylance. Don't worry, Mark Rylance. Things will get better for you in the Tudor world. He's playing Thomas Boleyn, her father. I suspect this is meant to be Hever Castle. It doesn't look like it was actually filmed there. Odd casting choices. We have Eric Bana as Henry VIII. So I think that's meant to be, well, it must be the first meeting between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, the start of this tumultuous, monumental romance that will change the face of English history. It probably didn't happen in that way. The first time that we know they were in the same place at the same time was 1520 at the Field of Cloth of Gold in France. Anne at the time was part of the French court. So they may have met, they may not have met.
May I present my daughter, Anne?
A daughter? No one said anything of a daughter. Had we known, we might have come sooner.
Your Majesty?
It was around that time, 1520, that Henry VIII started a relationship with Anne's sister, Mary, as well, who we also saw there. So there were reasons for them to encounter each other, to interact. But as we know, it's not until about 5 years later that there's any sort of infatuation between them. The Boleyns as well, I should say, were a very up-and-coming nouveau riche sort of family. They had risen from essentially London merchants and used their money to purchase things like Hever Castle and also to make really, really advantageous marriages.
Good morning, Anne.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Who will you ride with?
On my own, Your Grace.
On your own?
Okay, I'm not going to lie, Eric Bana is an odd choice for Henry VIII, who was a pale redhead. Eric Bana does not bring any of that to it. He was probably about that size. He was a tall man. He hadn't gained the weight that he did later on in his life. By that point, the famous Holbein portrait is a little bit after that, when he's starting to look a little, let's call it girthy. He's looking a little girthy. And I think they kind of allude to that. They give him quite puffy jackets.
What's the noise?
It's Mistress Boleyn, Your Grace. Her stories of life at the French court.
Anne Boleyn grew up largely in the French court. She began as a young girl in the household of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands, and then moves to the French court when Henry's sister, Mary Tudor, becomes very short-lived Queen of France in 1514. And so she spends her formative years in the French court, which is why in other portrayals she's given a French accent, which she may have had. And here she's joining the court at a meal. She was, by this point, a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, Henry's queen. And so she wouldn't necessarily just be sat there eating with everyone. She'd probably be attending the queen, but they obviously want to show her interacting with Henry in front of everyone. She returned to England from France in 1521 in order to marry her cousin, but that essentially fell through. She probably had her first real encounter with the king at a pageant known as the Château Vert, or Green Castle, where she played a role in a masque as Perseverance, which I think makes sense for what we know about Anne Boleyn.
I'm aware of one Boleyn girl, but she's lying in with a certain child in her belly.
That's a reference, once again, to her sister Mary, who was probably engaged in a relationship with the king about this time. She had 2 children that had traditionally been thought to perhaps have been the illegitimate children of Henry. I can't remember which one this is, if it's the older daughter Catherine or the younger son Henry. Catherine, the elder, was more likely to have been a child of Henry VIII. She was certainly born when they appear to have still been in a relationship. And it's probable that Henry never recognized her as an illegitimate child because she was a girl and there just wasn't much point.
What's so amusing?
I was merely offering my thoughts on the new French king. He was such great power, yet such meager authority as a man.
Continue.
His pettiness is astounding. He will bear a mortal grudge over the mildest of slights. Spoilt cub with a spike in his paw. Riven with resentment.
Presenting Anne here as very cultured, very intelligent, sort of sparring with the king while, of course, flattering him. He would have loved the idea that he was more of a king and more of a man than his rival, Francis I.
Unable to forgive or forget. A great king, a great man, rises above such things.
And what would you know of great men?
I've read enough books.
Natalie Portman physically makes a very good Anne Boleyn. She was often described as someone with almost sallow skin, so not very fair, not very pale, darker hair, and certainly very dark eyes. The dark Boleyn eyes that many found so captivating and were inherited by her daughter Elizabeth as well. You can question the accent, though. She's being very Queen Amidala in this, and I'm not sure it works.
Anne.
Your Grace?
You received my gifts?
Yes.
And? Did it not please you?
On the contrary, my lord. They pleased me greatly.
But then why do you insult me by returning them?
Because you insult me by sending them at all. My sister lies in bed with your child.
Do you wish to please me, sir? Then send her the gifts you send me.
I have shown Mary enough kindness and generosity.
So somewhere around 1525, he seems to become enamored with Anne Boleyn. The suggestion that she's returning his gifts, that she won't see him, that she won't entertain any of this, is part of a story that has been told about Anne Boleyn for a very long time. The fact of the matter is we only have half of the correspondence. We have Henry VIII's half. We don't have Anne's letters back to him, so we don't really know how she reacted. He does seem to be, in some sense, pleading with her in his letters. He wants her to sort of consent to something or submit to something. And there is eventually a letter in which he sort of says, yay, you've agreed. Fantastic.
And I would never betray my sister. No, I beg you. Leave me. This is too difficult to bear.
You see, the same pain as mine. Proof you feel the same way.
Perhaps. But since it can never come to
Now let me decide that.
So this idea that she is spurning his advances, and that's actually what's motivating him, might be true, might not be true. Certainly, she doesn't become his mistress. We know this. They don't consummate their relationship until just before they're married or around the time that they're married, which is many, many years later. It may have been because of a loyalty to Mary Boleyn. Probably not. Probably it had more to do with having seen the experience of her sister and wanting something better for herself.
My lord.
We've jumped a few years again. This is the Blackfriars Court, held in the summer of 1529, to try the question, essentially, of the marriage of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, whether or not it was legitimate. Henry had become convinced that it was not, that the marriage between Catherine and his brother Arthur had been full and complete, had been consummated, and that there was a line in the Bible, as indeed there is in the book of Leviticus, that says if a man should take his brother's wife, they should be, and it's either childless or sonless. Now, of course, they had a child, but they were not able to have a son. And he considered this to be God's judgment on this invalid and disallowed marriage.
How have I offended you? I have been a true obedient wife. I have loved all those whom you loved, and given you children, though it has pleased God to take them away. If there is any just cause against me, I will happily depart to my shame and dishonor. But I tell you, as God is my witness, there is none. So I beg you, dear husband, to spare me this humiliation. But if you will not, and you wish to challenge the validity of our marriage, then let it be in a proper court, and by the only authority I recognize, His Holiness himself.
It's pretty close to the record we have of her speech, except she doesn't at the end say anything about the Pope. The Pope's representative was there, so although she in a way disacknowledges the authority of the court by not participating, she would have been in favor of the idea that the Pope was presiding over the court as well. We tend to use the term divorce when we're talking about the marriage and the end of the marriage of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. In modern terms, it would be known as an annulment. That's perhaps more accurate, though they used the term divorce in the 16th century. And that's because what Henry was looking to do was not acknowledge that a marriage had taken place that he was then seeking to end, but the marriage had never actually legally taken place. It couldn't have taken place. And so he was trying to show that they had never been married at all. This was important because it affected the legitimacy of their daughter, Mary. If the marriage had never actually legally taken place, then she was a bastard. She was illegitimate, the same as his other illegitimate children.
Et eam diligere et honorare, tenere et custodire, sanem et infirmam, sicut sponsus debet sponsum. Ille soli a taelere, quam dio vita utrisque vestrum duravit.
So that was, I believe, the marriage of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. She appears heavily pregnant in that scene. She wasn't. They possibly even married twice, once while they were on the continent, traveling back from meeting the French king, and then again, just to make sure that everyone was happy with it, married again in England, once again in a small chapel or closet, nothing very grand. She might have suspected or known that she was pregnant by the time of the second wedding, but she certainly wasn't that pregnant. It's very important how she's crowned. She's crowned with Edward's crown, which is the sovereign's crown. No other queen consort was ever crowned with that crown before or after. And it gives her a legitimacy that no other queen consort had. The fact that she was crowned while pregnant, too, gives a legitimacy to her child, a legitimacy that was being questioned. Henry and Anne had married in secret. It's only around Easter of that year that word starts to get out. And during the Easter prayers, churches across the country are asked to pray for Queen Anne, which is how many people found out that she was the new queen. And it's before the marriage between Henry and Catherine is formally annulled. So for many, Henry was a bigamist who had taken a second wife alongside his first wife. So there were a lot of questions about the legitimacy of that marriage and therefore that child.
Is the child healthy? Perfectly, sir.
We're moving forward and upward here. We've got Wolf Hall, Mirror in the Light. Anne Boleyn's fall was quite rapid, and yet not rapid at all. There was a sort of slow movement against her that built up over the 3 years that she was queen, but it all essentially happened over a few short months, even weeks, when Henry becomes enamored with one of her ladies, Jane Seymour, and does not produce the much promised son, and in fact suffers miscarriages and stillborn births. And for Henry, that just brings up all the reasons, essentially, that he had annulled his marriage with Catherine of Aragon. And she's unpopular, and she's especially unpopular with the Spanish, with whom he's trying to build a new alliance. He's broken with Rome. He's established an independent English church, which is still essentially theologically Catholic, but separate from the larger Catholic Church. And so it has been a time of great turmoil for Henry and for the country. And there's a sense in which he wants to start anew. And so Cromwell, who is, of course, the main character of Wolf Hall, is assigned to bring down Anne Boleyn, and she's accused of committing adultery with 5 different men, including her own brother. Henry getting very fancy, Will Keen looking very perturbed, and Anne about to die. Henry and Jane married again in a queen's closet, this time I think at Whitehall, at just a very small private ceremony. They're juxtaposing the two events here, Anne Boleyn's execution and the marriage of Henry and Jane, which is, I think, meant to suggest that they're happening at the same time. That wasn't quite the case, though not that far off. Henry and Jane are betrothed the day after Anne is executed, and they marry about a week and a half later. So I'm not sure that they're meant to be implying that it happens on the exact same day, but it's certainly the case that they happen shockingly close together. And again, Henry is able to do this because he'd had the marriage to Anne annulled. It had never taken place, and so there's no reason to leave a stretch of time between one marriage and the next because the first marriage didn't exist. Jane Seymour, like Anne Boleyn, coming from not a noble family. Her father was a knight. Their home was Wolf Hall, which gives this series its name. She wasn't as educated as Anne. She does employ a similar strategy to Anne, however, in terms of catching the attention and holding the attention of the king. Whereas Anne may have not been doing it as a strategy, as intentionally, I think Jane probably was. She refuses his gifts. She makes protestations about her chastity and her marriage. And this really works, again, on Henry. Whereas the courtship between Henry and Anne had lasted years, Jane and Henry are married in a matter of months. They first appear to be something of an item in February of 1536. Anne is dead in May of 1536, and they're married very soon after. How that baby is not wailing with all that clapping and noise, I have no idea.
My lord?
So this is a huge moment for Henry VIII. He gets to hold his son. He has been waiting for a son since his marriage to Catherine of Aragon in 1509, and we're now in 1537, so that's almost 30 years. He's been desperate for a son. He's almost literally moved heaven and earth in order to get this son. It's important to him for personal reasons. It's a reflection of his own virility, his manliness, that he hasn't been able to produce a legitimate son up to this point. He has at least one illegitimate one. But it's also really important for him dynastically. He needs a son to follow him. Women aren't thought to be able to rule at this time, and there's all sorts of complications about when they get married. They have then a husband to rule over them. That's a big problem. So he needs a son. It's also worth remembering that we're still in the context of the legacy of the Wars of the Roses. There had been dynastic battles, conflicts, a civil war essentially, for decades in the 15th century. And we now know that that ends somewhere around the time that Henry VII, his father, comes to the throne. But everyone in that room is aware that they could fall back into it at any point. And so a son is essential to ensuring that civil war doesn't take place in England again. And of course, this is Cromwell's victory as much as it is Henry's. Cromwell has been the instrument by which Henry VIII was moving heaven and earth. And the fact that Cromwell has managed to get Henry a son is perhaps the height of his political career.
Pardon your old friend's plain speaking, Majesty. We are all overwrought.
Fitzwilliam, take yourself out of the council chamber before I have you taken out. My patience is not infinite, neither with you nor my daughter.
No question, Damian Lewis is a fantastic Henry VIII. He's commanding, he's volatile, he's a little bit scary. I think for me, Henry VIII does need a little bit more fire, but certainly he's scary enough in those moments that you understand what people were faced with when they came into the presence of Henry VIII.
The Duke of Norfolk wants an audience. He threatens to talk to you like a father.
Does he? I shall try to be a credit to him.
He says it is your duty to marry again.
I could well be content.
Jane Seymour dies, probably of some postpartum infection. We're not exactly sure. And this does leave Henry devastated. By all accounts, he loved Jane, and he certainly loved that she gave him a son, and probably wanted more sons from her as well. So in the height of this success, this victory, this familial joy, Jane is taken from him. And this is obviously a conversation not long after. They mention the Duke of Norfolk wanting to speak to him as a son. That's because the Duke of Norfolk was the uncle of Anne Boleyn. So there is this relationship between them. And he is also the uncle of a subsequent wife, Katherine Howard, who I'm sure we'll get to later. Henry does remain unmarried for 3 years. It's the longest stretch he remains unmarried since he marries Catherine in 1509. And there is the suggestion that perhaps he wanted to stay that way. Certainly the next wife that he has to be convinced into.
What do we hear of the widow, Madame de Longueville? I feel I could perhaps be interested in her, if in any lady.
I love the volte-face we get here. 1 second he's saying, I'd rather be chaste. I never want to marry again. And the next second he's going, what about that sexy widow over in France? Which I think speaks to his character.
Anne of Cleves, Majesty.
And this is as she stood before you?
Yes, as she is.
Anne of Cleves, as I'm sure many of you know, does end up becoming the chosen bride for Henry VIII, for his 4th wife. And this is essentially how it happens. He sends Hans Holbein the Younger, his court painter, to Cleves, the duchy, to paint both Anne and her sister, and decides, based on this portrait, whether he thinks that she might be a good wife for him. The decision to create this alliance with the Duchy of Cleves comes about because this is a state which has resisted Charles V, and particularly has also broken in some way with the Catholic Church. And so they're a good match for England. And then the question becomes whether Anne is a good match for Henry.
My lord, I have decided to make speed to Rochester and greet the bride in my own person.
Why, sir? It'll only be a day or two before she arrives.
I want to nourish love.
Majesty, with all respect, was this not aired in council? It was your councillor's earnest prayer that your Majesty spare himself the journey and that you greet the Queen in London, and you were pleased to accede.
Can I not change my mind, Risley?
So this cringe-worthy scene actually happens. Henry VIII does dress up in disguise and ride off to Rochester, where Anne of Cleves has just arrived, having sailed over from the continent. On New Year's Day, he shows up in her room, dressed certainly not as a king, and apparently embraces and kisses her without invitation. She's looking out the window at the time at a bear baiting and essentially ignores him, which, fair enough. He's some weirdo in his 50s, has just grabbed her and kissed her. He takes a great deal of offense at this, that she's not interested in him. When we get to 1540 and the marriage with Anne of Cleves, Henry is already becoming an older man. He'd had an injury in 1536, which had left him with an ulcerated leg, which wasn't healing, and he was walking with a staff. We have records of these staffs, and they had little whistles on the top of them so that he could call if he was essentially stuck somewhere. So he's this man who was so potent and so interested in his own potency was now really left very powerless and helpless in his own body, which was becoming increasingly diseased, decrepit, and obese.
How liked you the Queen? I liked her not well before. I like her much worse now. Her breasts are slack. Her belly has loose skin on it. When I felt it, it struck me to the heart. I had no appetite for the rest. I do not believe she is a maid.
Oh, Majesty, she has never strayed from her mother's side.
That is apparently essentially what Henry VIII said after his wedding night with Anne of Cleves, and they probably didn't ever consummate their marriage. Reportedly, when her ladies and her family asked her how her marriage was going, she said that the king was very much a gentleman and would come to her chamber each night and greet her and kiss her and then leave. And the lady responded, well, a lot more needs to happen before we'll ever get a Duke of York. And so there's this naivety that's often associated with Anne of Cleves, that she genuinely didn't understand what was supposed to happen and therefore what wasn't happening with Henry VIII. Henry from day one doesn't want this marriage, feels pushed into this marriage, and so is looking for a way out. He's able to get that way out after just a few months and has the marriage annulled. Anne of Cleves is very happy to sign on the dotted line. There's none of the resistance that you see with Catherine of Aragon, for instance. At that point, she knows what the threat is, and I'm not sure she was that keen on being married to him anyway. Henry is very grateful for this compliance. He rewards her with various properties and presents. She's given Hever Castle, for instance, which had been taken from the Boleyns. And she's given the title and status of the king's sister. And that means she has status at court, which puts her above any other woman, aside from the king's own wife and daughters. And so she lives quite a good life.
Do you remember the day we rode down to the Weald to see the iron masters and find out new ways of casting cannon? Those were brighter days.
Next up, we have everyone's favorite, the Tudors. So Henry VIII enters with his new bride, his new queen, Katherine Howard. This is just after the annulment of the marriage with Anne of Cleves. Katherine Howard was one of her ladies, which is where Henry first cites her. She's very young. She's about 16 or 17, we think. He is not. He's approaching 50, as I said, walking with a stick, getting girthier by the day, having trouble with his eyesight as well, but they appear to be very enamored with each other, or at least Henry is enamored with her. Whereas with Wolf Hall, we had the juxtaposition of the scenes of Anne's execution and Henry's marriage to Jane Seymour, and that hadn't quite lined up. It is the case that Henry VIII marries Katherine Howard on the day that Thomas Cromwell is executed. So that is a very disturbing confluence of events that do happen on the same day. And Thomas Cromwell really falls because of Henry's embarrassment and frustration with the Cleves marriage.
Ambassador Chapuis, Monsieur Marillion, we are happy to accept your credentials from King Francis. Welcome to our court. I come here this day to introduce to you my new wife, Queen Catherine. I was first attracted to her by a notable appearance of honor. cleanness, and maidenly behavior. It seems incredible.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as Henry VIII, a very controversial casting choice, to say the least. And I think I read somewhere that it's in his contract that he wouldn't put on weight or wear a fat suit or anything like that. So they're trying to show his weight with the large fur coats and things like that. But he still looks very much like a young man. Physically, we're seeing the limp and everything as well. But there's also the suggestion that he's given a sense of new life, new youth, with his young teenage bride. Joss Stone here playing Anne of Cleves, being very happy that she's no longer married to the king.
You play well. You didn't used to, I remember.
I never used to drink wine or play music. Now I do all of those things. And I like to do it. I'm free, and I like to do it.
I come to your bed tonight.
With no pretense of anything, just can I come to your bed tonight? It is the case that Anne of Cleves and Henry VIII were friendly after the annulment. As I said, he showered her with gifts and properties, and she was still a member of the court and remained a sort of mother figure to his children. But they probably didn't do this historically. This is the Tudors, so there needs to be some sex every 5 or 10 minutes, or it can't function as a show. And so they decide to have Henry VIII sleep with Anne of Cleves. After the Howard affair, and we'll get to that in a minute, there is some suggestion that he marry Anne of Cleves again, and he outright refuses. So it's very unlikely that they have this sort of relationship after the annulment.
Well, what do you have to say? Speak.
Majesty, the King of Scotland is not coming. He's gone back to Edinburgh. But worse, well, a God could forgive them. A Scottish army has ridden over the border and is harrying our people, spoiling fields, burning barns, and killing all those who oppose them.
In the 1540s, there was quite a bit of conflict between England and Scotland. I mean, pick a decade, and there was a lot of conflict in this period between England and Scotland, but in many ways it had started up again, in large part because the King of Scots' wife, Margaret, who was Henry's sister, had recently died, and so the reason for keeping the peace essentially was gone. There were Scottish raids on English territories, there were English raids on Scottish territories. Here it's presented very one-sided, that it's the Scots who are raiding England. England did it to Scotland all the time. The borderlands in general were just an unpleasant place to live.
What does this letter say?
I thought your Majesty just read.
I asked you to tell me what this letter says, my Lord Hertford.
The letter accuses Queen Catherine of dissolute living before she was married to your Majesty, while she was living with the...
That's pretty close to how Henry receives the news of Catherine's, let's call it, dissolute living in her youth. She was a member of the household of the Dowager Duchess, who was her, I think, step-grandmother. She was one of many young noble children who were kept there. Her father had been a gambler, so although she's a Howard, she didn't come from money. And there's all sorts of reports of lax living, essentially, that go on in that household. A former member of that household named Mary Lascelles refuses to serve in the Queen's new household and tells her brother that the reason for that is because she knows all of this stuff that went on in Catherine's youth. Her brother John writes all this down and delivers the information to Thomas Cranmer, who is Archbishop of Canterbury. And he, after a lot of back and forthing, gives that information to Henry VIII while he's attending Mass in his chapel at Hampton Court. He chooses his moment very well because he knows that Henry has to be quiet because it's during the Mass, and so he can't have a massive explosion as he does here. It's pretty immediate that this information is acted upon. John and his sister Mary are interrogated. Other information is gotten from witnesses to that household of the Dowager Duchess, and a case is essentially put together detailing Catherine's life, which included several accusations of sexual conduct with largely older men. And I think we have to keep in mind here that Catherine was a child while all of this was happening to her. It mentions her music instructor, for instance, who essentially abuses her as a child. And even in her marriage to Henry, she's probably still 16 or 17, certainly a child in our eyes. So Catherine, I think there's a tendency to present her as a foolish, promiscuous harlot. But what she was really was a sexually abused child.
Lady Catherine! Stop her! Stop! Stop there! Katherine Howard, stop! You are arrested! Stop! Do not proceed, Katherine Howard!
Your Majesty! I must speak to you. Please. Please, Your Majesty. Please. It's me, Catherine. It's Catherine. It's Catherine. Please. Please. Henry! Henry, please! No! Your Majesty! No, please! Henry! No, please! Please, Henry!
Nothing like that happened. That scene, I think, is put in there because Hampton Court has a long tradition of a ghost who is meant to be Katherine Howard, who runs through, I think it's the gallery in Hampton Court, screaming for Henry to save her. I've never seen it myself, but let me know if you have. Probably, though, nothing like that would have occurred. Catherine was confined to her apartments at Hampton Court before she was told of the allegations against her, and Henry left for Whitehall in that time. So there wouldn't have been an opportunity for her to have known what was happening to her and try to reach out to Henry in that way. Henry, by then, had a long tradition of riding away from people he was about to have executed, and there's no exception here with Catherine.
Katherine Howard, I have to tell you that you are going to die. You'll be taken to your place of execution tomorrow morning, the 13th of February, escorted by members of the Privy Council.
May I ask one favor? Will you bring the block to me?
Tamsin Merchant does a fantastic job, I think, with the potentially contradictory character of Katherine Howard. On the one hand, she is someone who's been abused for much of her young life. On the other hand, she is someone with a lot of power, really, who brings new youth and vitality to the Tudor court and to Henry VIII. She's someone who I think is fun. She has a great relationship with Henry's children, and I think that's really captured here. I might be alone here, but I think that there's a lot of good in The Tudors as a TV show. Yes, there's too much sexposition. Yes, they take some real liberties with some of the characters. But in some areas, they do an amazing job of sticking to the historical record, and I think really representing the complexity of some of these historic figures, like Katherine Howard. And a very recent one now, Firebrand. It's one of the few on-screen depictions we get of Henry's last wife, Catherine Parr. She's not often represented.
Missed you.
This is a reunion of sorts. Henry has just returned from an invasion of France, which he insisted on going on. Nobody really wanted him to go. At this point, we're in 1544 or so. He's 53. He's very obese. He can't walk unaided. We know as well his weight and waist size at this point, because for this expedition to France, he had a new coat of armor made. And so we know that he had, I think it's a 54-inch waist, and therefore he weighed somewhere around 300, 320 pounds. So he was a very large man and was suffering in his health, but insisted on going to France, this, I think, attempt to regain something of his youth, which had really sat behind the Howard marriage as well.
You didn't want the feast and the music?
These legs are worse. That's why we came home. Couldn't get on my horse. In front of all my men, it was humiliating.
Everything he's just said there is largely true. They did have to hoist him into his saddle to ride his horse. He really actually slowed down the entire campaign, to the frustration of their allies. It would have been a much more successful campaign if he'd not gone along. And everyone was extremely concerned that at some point he'd just drop dead in France, and where that would leave England. In some ways, it might have been really good, because you would have had Catherine Parr as a regent over a young Edward VI, and maybe that would have been great. I don't know.
Thank you. Did you enjoy it?
I wish I could have done more.
I bet.
The plague is getting worse, and deaths are increasing in London.
Yes,
It might be better
yes,
if we
yes, yes, yes,
postpone
yes,
our
yes,
job.
yes, yes. We're staying. We're staying. I'm back now. I'm home, and you don't need to worry your little head about it anymore.
I really like Jude Law as a really awful Henry VIII, as he was. I think Jude Law is a good choice too, because of course Jude Law, a not unattractive man, and here he's playing someone who was once attractive and has lost that. He's also got a menace about him that is undeniable. And I really like the dynamics of this scene where she's saying, I wish I could have done more as regent. I wish I'd had more power. And he's reading that as, I wish I could have done more as regent. I'm so glad you're back to take over for me, which is, I think, not what she was really saying. They're just missing each other because of his misogyny, essentially. And that's a major theme in this film.
Farabi, you wretched snatch.
Your Majesty, it is lovely to have you here back.
Oh, such a magnificent liar.
How are we feeling?
The French damp got in and stayed. 10 years, and it still hasn't.
This is a very painful and difficult scene to watch. If you're currently eating lunch, maybe come back to it later. But he mentions having suffered the injury 10 years before, which is roughly correct. He probably had his legs crushed when he fell off his horse in a jousting accident in 1536. And it just seems that the injury never properly healed, and so he had these great ulcerous infected sores on his leg, which were incredibly painful and would make even the most balanced of men grumpy, to say the least. And if you're already Henry VIII, it's going to push you pretty far.
Our wife to test it. Try it. Is it good?
It likes a bit of salt.
Catherine was like many of his domestic wives, the daughter of a knight. She had been married twice before. She was married the first time, I think, at the age of 17 for just a few short years. Her husband had probably always been a bit sickly and died. He was in his 20s. Her second husband had been twice her age, and she had really been married to him as a sort of nursemaid. She'd had no children with either of her first two husbands. She joined the household of the Princess Mary, largely because her family had always been friends with Catherine of Aragon and therefore her daughter Mary. And it's there, having joined the Lady Mary's household, that Henry sets his sights on Catherine, and so they are married. I should say as well, she's an incredibly well-educated and intelligent woman. She's about 30 when they marry. So she's lived a bit of a life and has her own intellectual pursuits and interests.
No. No more lies, Kit.
So it's at this point that the film really departs from historical record, and I think enters its own sort of multiversal what-if kind of territory.
No more lies.
Your Majesty, Catherine Parr, Queen of England and Ireland, Catherine Willoughby Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk, Ellen Calthorpe, Countess of Sussex, I arrest you in the name of the King. Anything in the Queen's apartments is now and has always been the property of the Crown. We will escort you from these rooms and install you in other, more appropriate lodgings until we have discovered the full scope of your crimes.
There was an attempt to bring her down. Bishop Gardiner was one of the leaders of that attempt. According to the later writer John Fox, who was a Protestant martyrologist, these articles were drawn up against Catherine Parr. She had no idea what was going on, and then they were essentially dropped in a hallway where they were picked up by one of her supporters. She read these articles, had a bit of a breakdown about them, who wouldn't? And Henry sent his doctor to look after her, who had also heard about the plot against her. And he advised her to go and submit to the king. And so she found the king, bowed at his feet, and essentially told him that she was a weak and silly woman, that of course she would never seek to instruct the king. She had merely engaged him in religious debates so that she could benefit from his wisdom as someone who was lesser than him. So this submission and this acknowledgement of her female frailty wins Henry over, and the next day when they come to arrest her, he throws them all out, calling them errant knaves. Now, whether or not that actually happened, it's probable that there was some attempt against her because she was such a strong, intelligent Protestant, and there was this feud in the court between the traditionalists and the Protestants. And so she was seen as quite a threat, actually. She is, of course, even in Fox's account, never actually arrested. So this portrayal that we're about to have, where she's carted off, nothing like that ever happens. And the idea that Henry would be there for her arrest, well, as we've said, Henry liked to ride off and ride away from people he had condemned, so he wouldn't be there in the room like that.
How's he gonna do with you, Kit?
That's why you brought me here. To help you decide.
So we have Catherine coming in to essentially Henry VIII's deathbed. She's been released from a prison where she was being held. Nothing like that would have happened when he did arrest his wives, and he did so fairly regularly. They ended up in quite nice apartments. She's in some dungeon or something. And so she's called into his bedchamber where everyone thinks that he's dying. And I mean, I'm just going to spoil the movie for you now. She kills him.
No.
Surprise you to learn that Henry VIII didn't die because Catherine Parr killed him with her elbow. He slipped into a coma the night before he died and actually didn't awaken. There was no communication that could be had with him. The story goes that he squeezed Cranmer's hand as a recognition of his sins and his belief in God. But beyond that, there was no communication had with him. We're not sure exactly what killed him. We are sure it wasn't Catherine Parr, but we aren't sure exactly what killed him. It was probably something to do with the infection in his leg, or it may have been a pre-existing condition. Probably it was liver or kidney failure, though, that made him slip into a coma and eventually die. I would love to be able to tell you that Catherine Parr lived happily ever after following the death of Henry VIII. That's unfortunately not what happens. She marries again her fourth husband very quickly after, scandalously quickly after, about 4 months. That's a big problem because, of course, theoretically she could have been pregnant with the king's child, and a remarriage so soon could really confuse paternity. That didn't end up being an issue. She married the uncle to the new king, a man called Thomas Seymour, who was also a very unpleasant person. He's up there with Henry. He potentially sexually abused the Princess Elizabeth, who was in their care. And unfortunately, Catherine Parr died after giving birth to their daughter at the age of 35. Firebrand is one of the most historically detailed films ever produced about the Tudor period. The costumes, the sets, they're amazing. They had amazing historical consultants working on this show. I think Jude Law is a fantastically awful Henry VIII, and Alicia Vikander brings the quiet power of Catherine Parr to the screen. Obviously, again, it is a feminist revenge fantasy. Nothing like this would have happened, but I kind of don't mind watching one of Henry's wives take him out with an elbow. So we've looked at 5 different depictions of Henry VIII on screen. I have to say, probably my favorite is Wolf Hall. I think it's detailed, it's really dependent on historical sources. It gets a lot right about Henry, and we got to see 2 of his wives, Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves, here as well. Perhaps my least favorite, and I'm sorry I have to do it, is the Other Boleyn Girl. I really don't like their portrayal of Henry VIII as so sympathetic and so mishandled by the women in his life. And I'm afraid that Natalie Portman is not my favorite Anne Boleyn either, though I think it has more to do with the film. If you like this video, please do like and subscribe and check out all the amazing historical content from History Hit. And if you're interested in the Tudors, maybe also check out my books, The House of Dudley and Thomas More, A Life and Death in Tudor England.